So in a lot of my recent videos, I've been talking about regret, specifically regret regarding finances, not helping out my parents, and spending too much money on cars unwisely. And it seems like a lot of you have resonated with that. I've seen a lot of comments where people share similar stories where they've made the same mistakes as me, or so many others that are close to being graduated or close to starting their careers and are tempted to fall into the same sort of traps. And I also really want to just thank those that have just reaffirmed me, just reassured me that we all make mistakes and not to beat myself up over it too much. And this week, I got this comment from one of my longtime viewers. In it, he asked what other big life regrets I have, and specifically whether or not I regretted leaving YouTube back in 2011, mentioning how I used to get hundreds of thousands of views on every video, and wondering if I regret shutting down my channel, and how life might have been different if I had just continued and gotten big. But I was digging through yet another old hard drive, and I came across this old video that I put out sometime in 2009.
You're on your comp surfing YouTube to see what's next.
And what's super interesting about that is I happened to capture a lot of the old school YouTube interface. And you can see a bunch of the creators back then, how big they've gotten now compared to where they started back in the day. And even the number of views that they have on their videos has just exploded over time. I even had a note in this video thanking my 14,000 some odd subscribers. And you know, it was really a journey that I started back then because it was fun. You know, the community was small at the time, not that many people were making YouTube videos, and you know, the biggest YouTubers had less than 1 million subscribers. And you know, watching this video and just seeing how far people have come, and then thinking about my own YouTube journey, this was just a huge nostalgia trip. And so I was just watching this and thinking about this comment, did I regret quitting my channel at the time, and how different would life have been? I remember specifically between 2009 and 2010 when they were just starting YouTube partnerships and YouTube started paying people and putting ads on videos. I remember I had just started my job and I had this conversation with one of the managers at work, and I specifically mentioned that, hey, you know, YouTube is starting to pay a bunch of us creators for our videos. And I remember specifically telling him, you know, the money was actually decently good. I was surprised at how much some of us were actually getting. And I'll never forget these words that he said to me. He said, yeah, you know, it could be decent for some time, but it's never going to be a career. And he just kind of scoffed at the idea, just kind of passing it off as something that was impossible. And you know, to be honest, I think I really took those words to heart. You know, I don't blame him for what he said, but I can understand from his point of view how something new like this would seem impossible. And you know, even in my mind, I was getting something around like $900 to $1,000 a month, which in terms of back then was actually pretty good. But I think because I had just started my career and I had one of these, you know, mentors slash managers telling me something like this, it really got into my head that, hey, you know, maybe I should instead start focusing on my career instead of trying to do this YouTube thing off to the side. And so, you know, this question of do I regret closing my YouTube and not focusing on it more at the time, you know, this is a question that I've thought about for some time now. And you know, I think if I'm honest with myself, I think the answer is yes. I shut my channel down at pretty much the peak as YouTube was starting to take off. My channel was starting to take off. I think I closed it right around when I had, you know, 141,000 subscribers, around 20 or 30 million views, and it was really starting to take off. But I think as I was going through the rest of my hard drive and thinking about this question more this week, I did come across something that kind of made me reflect on this idea of regret and kind of tying together the experience that I'm about to share with you guys and also this experience of closing my YouTube channel together. As you guys have already seen in my previous video talking about how I yelled at my parents for not buying me a Supra, I showed this Prelude that my parents got me when I was 16. And I didn't mention it in that video, but the stories with the Prelude go so much further and so much deeper, and the regret with that car actually runs so deep. And I was reminded of this when I uncovered some pictures in my hard drive. You know, I briefly touched on it in that video, but all my friends had cars and I wanted a car to be able to play Fast and Furious with them too, and so I begged my parents for this Prelude, which they got me. But then I still wasn't satisfied, and I shared in that video, I ended up modding that car with my parents' money. I asked them for a body kit. They even bought me an exhaust, a Tanabe Racing Medallion exhaust that was too loud. They got me lowering springs, which made the car incredibly difficult and hard to drive. It's safe to say that I modded this car way out, and I still shared this car with my dad. My dad often still took the car to work multiple times a week. And so here I was playing Fast and Furious with this car that wasn't even mine, that I shared with my dad, modding with money that wasn't even mine because I didn't even have any, I didn't work, and then making it inconvenient, difficult to drive, too loud for my dad who was still using it daily. I mean, he told me stories where he would stop at lights and then teenagers would pull up next to them in riced out Civics and they'd look at him, they'd laugh and they'd rev at him. But you know, he just never complained, and neither did my mom. And this is a recurring theme that you keep seeing in my videos, that my parents were just so self-sacrificing that they just let me do what I wanted and just kept giving me more and more, everything that I wanted, whatever I asked. One day, and this is super embarrassing, but one day I had a friend that had this in-dash DVD player with a screen that would come up and down from inside the dash. He gave it to me because he wanted me to sell it for him on eBay. Instead of selling it for him, I actually took it, thought it would be cool to install it inside my car and just leave the wiring hanging out, since I was gonna, you know, put it back in the box later and sell it on eBay for him. And so one day when my dad had taken it to work, he had parked it on the side of the street in front of his workplace. And later in the afternoon, when it was time for him to go home, he came out and found out that somebody had seen the wiring and seen the DVD player just sticking out of the dash, had broken the window and had stolen the thing right out from inside the car. I mean, just talk about causing trouble for my parents with this thing. Not only was getting me a car not enough, not only was letting me mod it not enough, that I had to make it loud and uncomfortable, a rice rocket, and I also had to make it so that things would get stolen out of it. And you know, you think that story's bad, but the truth is, this gets so much worse. In my desire to play Fast and Furious again with my friends, I ended up, in the course of owning that car, getting, you know, several speeding tickets. I even got pulled over and got a speeding ticket once for street racing with my friends, but I'm gonna save that story for another time. But in the course of owning that car, I installed this modification called a cold air intake.
Is that your car?
See a cool air intake.
Now, before I continue with the story, you just need one small technical detail, so please bear with me. If you watched my old Supra video, then you may remember my illustration of a car engine kind of like a guy on a bike. And like a guy on a bike, an engine needs a source of energy and also air. And so whereas a person would eat food for energy and then breathe, an engine would ingest in air and also take in fuel. Now, every car has an air box that looks something like this. So it sits pretty high up in the engine bay where it's nice and dry. And that's where most cars get their air from. But in an effort to be a boy racer and try to extract as much horsepower as possible from my little Honda Prelude, I installed this AEM branded cold air intake, which essentially was a tube that replaced the air box that routed the air intake point to below the bumper. So low in the car. I even picked the one with the red tube because I wanted it to match my car. And the thought here, and whether or not it's even effective, was that the air down lower is cooler, and so it's more dense, so it results in more horsepower for your car. And really the difference is probably marginal, if at all. And so now, since your car is sucking air through this tube like a straw, that presents a problem if there's any water around. And you guys might already see where this story is headed. My dad had taken the car and he was driving my brother to school one day, and it happened to be raining. And I still remember distinctly, it was the Raymond exit off the 91, and they were under the overpass, and it was somewhat flooded. Now, it wasn't flooded to the point where cars weren't able to make it through, but let me tell you, that 8-9 inches of water was enough for my modified lowered Prelude to suck up water into the engine. The term is called hydrolock, and essentially it blew up the engine from the inside out. I still remember my brother telling me the day that it happened, my dad had to take his shoes off and step into the puddle in his business outfit to push the car out of that puddle. And to this day, I'm still so thankful that a kind stranger actually stopped and helped him with that, but it ended up doing like $4,000 worth of damage. We had to replace the entire engine because the engine was blown, all because of my silly modifications. And now fast forward to when I was in college, I actually got an internship at AEM in Hawthorne, the same company that made the intake that installed on the Prelude. And ironically enough, my job was to design intakes for them in AutoCAD. Well, long story short, one morning on the 105 headed to work, I actually got into an accident and ended up totaling the Prelude. And so now the story comes full circle, and if you ask me, thinking back, do I regret bugging my parents to get me that car? Do I regret modding it? Do I regret totaling it? I think taking it in a vacuum, the answer is a huge resounding yes, but when it came time to shop for a replacement for that car, because of my experience of going through all those things with that car, I understood at that point that what my parents and what our family needed was not another sports car, that we needed something that was practical, that was larger, that could carry the whole family, and something that was reliable and that I wouldn't be tempted to mod. And so we ended up picking a 2007 red Toyota Camry to replace it, and that car couldn't have served its purpose any better. And that's not the only thing that I took away from that. From that experience, I also learned that I did not want a car that was lowered beyond drivability. I did not want a car that was gonna be too loud, and I did not want something that had a body kit on it. And so now fast forward to today, with my ownership of the Supra and the NSX, I've left the body relatively stock and I haven't lowered them beyond the point of drivability, which, looking at the pictures of a lot of the cars that I saved from back in high school, that would have been the case if I didn't learn this lesson earlier. And so now to come back and address Mr. Poundrify's question about whether or not I regret leaving YouTube, again, I think the answer is yes when taken in a vacuum, but I think with where I am right now in life, I've just come to realize that it's so much more important to take the lessons that led up to where we are and take the situation and the circumstances that we're in right now and then move forward with that understanding and with that experience. For a lot of us, and me especially, it's very easy to get caught up in the past, not being able to move on and move beyond what happened in history, and all this thought and attention to what is already behind us can really make us captive and unable to move forward with the opportunities that are ahead of us. And in thinking about this, I specifically think about the situation with my mom, with her dementia, with the interaction that I have with her these days, having to take care of her, not being able to have her respond to me like she used to. And for some time now, it was so easy for me to get caught up in the depression, in the sadness of thinking about how our relationship used to be, how she used to be able to give me hugs, tell me that she loved me, and how just looking at the situation now, how those days are gone, and that things are completely different now. But the truth is, if I continue to choose to focus on what is already gone, I'm going to miss out on all the opportunities for the interaction and the experience and the relationship that I can have with her now moving forward. And so that really reflects my thoughts now about leaving YouTube, about coming back now and wondering whether or not life would be different if I had just continued on back then. How I see it now is I have this incredible community of people who stuck with me through thick and thin, who stuck with me and stayed with me even through my year-long hiatuses, my closing of the old channel. And now that I'm back, there's so many of you each week that continue to tune in, that continue to encourage me, build me up, and it just makes me appreciate so much what I have and where I am right now, that I just want to continue making videos, that I just want to continue building this channel from where it is right now without considering what it could have been or where it could have been if I had not done what I did in the past. And so that's just the encouragement I want to leave with you guys today. For myself, I'm just so encouraged. I just want to be here. I want to pour my heart and soul into every single video that I put out every single week. And for you guys, I just want to leave you guys with these words. The past can hurt, but we can choose to either run from it or we can learn from it.